Yeah, the Nephilim, the Nephilim is one of these things. I believe the term that's supposed to make me sound smart when I say it is the Hapax Legomena. If you've heard that. Have you heard that? Yeah, Gesundheit. Hapax Legomena. And now this might be a different word, but if I remember right, Hapax Legomena is one of these words that shows up basically one time in Scripture. And the way that we understand a lot of ancient words is we compare and contrast how they're used in different places in Scripture. So, for example, another Hapax, and this is, Nephilim is only used once. It says that the Nephilim were there in those times. Who, what, it's not like it says like the Canaanites. It's not like it's talking about the Philistines, right? Who are the Nephilim? I believe it says it's the sons of God and the daughters of men. And I tend to read that as believers and unbelievers being married to each other, and the result of that is being unequally yoked. The Bible will talk about that later on. The Hapax Legomena. Unequally yoked. In the 1 Corinthians 6, I think, there's a command against being unequally yoked, being an unbeliever being married to a believer, particularly for the children. This is a problem because if you've got an unbeliever and a believer, or you've got, let's say, a Buddhist and a Christian married, what do they do on Sunday? And the house is divided. And the idea is that you're supposed to be united. Husband and wife are supposed to be like one body. So how can one body serve two different masters? But yeah, so that's generally how I read it. There's nothing in the Bible that seems to indicate that angels can procreate, so I don't buy into the whole, who is it, the Da Vinci Code guy? I think he had a lot to do with this. Dan something or other. This idea that it's... Yeah, Dan Brown, that it's angels and people, and the offspring of angels and people equal Nephilim. I don't see the biblical evidence for that, but it's a very popular theory because it makes for cool movies. But yeah, so Nephilim is one of these words, Hapax Legomena. Another interesting word is Joseph's Technicolor Dreamcoat. So the word Technicolor is not in the Hebrew or the Greek as far as I know. But it is a special coat. It's somehow an expensive coat. It's unique, so when you see the coat, you say that's Joseph's coat. But what is unique about it? When you think of Joseph's coat, what do you think? Many colors. Many colors is probably the most popular kind of understanding of this thing. And it's the name for the coat is a palm, like the palm of your hand, a palm coat. So the question is, what is a palm coat? Is it a coat whose sleeves go down to the palm of your hand? Is it a coat that has stripes that are a palm width, and then there's different stripes of fabric of different colors? Maybe both. I don't know. I'm totally okay with the colorful coat idea. I think that probably makes a lot of sense. It'd be instantly distinguishable, and bright colors would be like a sign of royalty and a sign of spending a lot of money on something. So that's another one of those Hapax Legomena, or whatever the plural of that word is. Anyways, that's me trying to sound smart. But now to get back to me stumbling through these these laws, we're going to go back into Exodus chapter 22, I believe, maybe 23. Let's see. Okay, yes, I just wanted to really quickly cover the ending of chapter Exodus 22 again, because there was some stuff I wanted to spend a little bit more time on. Then we can get into Exodus 23. Right now, Moses is up on the mountain, and he's getting all kinds of rules for how to live in Israelite society. He's got the 10 Commandments, but in addition to that, he's getting a bunch of other things like, this is what we do with an interaction where somebody dies, accidentally or on purpose, or regarding slavery, how you should treat these people, and etc. Keep going to Exodus chapter 22, verse 21. Let's talk about this, because this verse has come up a lot lately. You'll never guess why. You'll never guess why this verse is brought up on TV lately until I read it to you. All right, Exodus 25:21. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. Sojourners. So what is this regard? What is a sojourner? Does anybody know what a sojourner is? Yeah, like a kind of a traveler, a foreigner, but it's not just anybody who kind of walks through. Like, let's say you're passing through Jerusalem to get to, I don't know, Jericho. It's not that you're just passing through, but a sojourner is somebody who specifically comes in and stays in another land by invitation legally. So the Israelites, how did they get to Egypt? Did they invade Egypt? Egypt, looked the other way. They all ran in. They were invited. Exactly. This was the story of Joseph. We went through this in Genesis. Is the story of Joseph and Joseph's family. They were invited into Egypt, and their population exploded in Egypt. This was not their land. This was not the promised land in Egypt. They were sojourners. They were invited guests who were allowed to come into the land. And that's what they did. So this is saying, look, you were guests in the land of Egypt, and God brought you out of Egypt. Well, so in this, you are also supposed to take care of those people who come and sojourn in your land. These are guests in your land. Now, people, unfortunately, today are applying this to anytime anybody is in your land or in your house or whatever, you have to take care of them regardless of whether they've been invited or not. So this has been applied to the conversation about immigration. Now, immigration, again, each country has their own laws about immigration. Are you allowed to be in the country? What do you have to do to be in the country? That sort of thing. This is how it's been since the concept of nations has ever existed. There have always been borders. There's always been laws about who can live where. You remember Pharaoh gave certain land to the Israelites. They didn't just come over and take whatever land they wanted, but he said, look, here's Goshen, or here's good land for your family. And he went and he put them in this certain land. So because of that, the concept of an invited guest taking care of people that if you've invited somebody into your house, you need to take care of them. That's just, it's common courtesy, but it's also God's law. If you invite somebody into your country, you're not allowed to abuse them and take advantage of them. So you should not wrong a sojourner or oppress them. So just because if you've invited somebody and they've come into the country legally, you have no right to then treat them as a second-class citizen. You have no right to say, this was, oh, good grief. This is not just American history, but this is the history of basically every country. This is a common sin. We'll pick on Americans because we know American history. When the Irish immigrated over to the United States and the Italians immigrated over to the United States, there were periods of time where they were treated as second-class citizens. Irish need not apply. You put that on the storefront. You weren't allowed in certain establishments if you were Italian. Or the Chinese, for example, were invited over, and many of them were abused and used to build the railroads. They were put in really horrible working conditions so they could build the railroads. So there's a lot of history, and this is not just the United States. Every country has done this, unfortunately, where you invite people in, they come in legally, and then they're taken advantage of. You get off the boat in New York, and you don't speak English, and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I could take your bags for you, and then they do take your bags, and they run off. And you're not used to the customs in the country. Taking advantage of somebody who's in a foreign place is a horrible thing to do, because God says you were foreigners in Egypt. And the Egyptians, their job was to take care of you, not turn you into slaves is what they did eventually, but to take care of you. So you should it's a golden rule. Treat others how you would want to be treated. Yes, ma'am?
The operative word there, though, is in bondage.
Well, that is the important distinction. That's what a sojourner is. So there's a difference between a sojourner and there's a difference between a house guest and a burglar. Burglary isn't when you steal things. Burglary is when you go into a place uninvited. It's like breaking and entering. You don't have to actually steal things for it to be a crime. So this is the problem when we come to a conversation about immigration is, are we overlooking, sometimes intentionally, the distinction between somebody being invited and coming in legally and somebody breaking the law to come in? Now, this doesn't mean that you can abuse people who break the law. Obviously, you still have to follow the law. Well, they broke the law first. No, that's not an excuse to break the law when dealing with them. But it's not the same protection as a house guest. It's not the same protection as a sojourner. For those who break the law, it is just for them to go in front of a judge and for the law to be carried out. For somebody who's followed the law, like a sojourner, it is appropriate for them to be welcomed in. Now, here's an excellent example of this. Have you heard of the wet foot, dry foot policy? I don't think it exists anymore. The wet foot, dry, for Cuba. So in Cuba, you would have a lot of people who would be fleeing from the Republic of Cuba because obvious reasons. Now, they'd be fleeing from Cuba and they'd end up in Florida. And there was a policy for a while that the moment they set foot on soil in Florida, they were protected. They were invited, and if they were fleeing from Cuba, this is not any country, if they were fleeing specifically from Cuba and they set foot on American soil, they had U.S. protection. This was the law for a while. Now, what was interesting is that so many Cubans, citizens in Florida, they'd immigrated from Cuba and gone to Florida, and they'd end up building, very hardworking families that built up these businesses and stuff, and they still lived in Florida, so they would see some new Cuban families come over and migrate over, and they would run out and meet them on the beach, and they would invite them in, and they would give them jobs, and they would be invited into the community of other people who spoke Spanish and who had similar customs and traditions, and they would bring them in and they would welcome them with open arms. This is the idea of taking care of sojourners, taking care of your neighbor. So this is a distinction. This is something that I think was done correct. Now, unfortunately, that law does not exist anymore, which is a shame because the idea, it was thought to have been too divisive, that it was making it look like we were not allied with Castro, which is true. But my point in this is saying, look, you can actually love your neighbor when you invite them in as sojourners. It's a good thing to rush out and welcome your neighbor and greet them. And you can think of so many traditions and so many cultures where this is a good thing. The Greeks, for example, they had these stories about one of the most horrible things you could ever do in Greek society, think of like Zeus and all that, like that time period, is if you had a guest in your house is to treat them poorly. If you did that, then you would have the wrath of not just Zeus, but who's the goddess of the hearth. They had what was it? Demeter? No, Demeter is she was seasoned. Yeah. I forget her name. But anyways, the idea is if you were mistreating guests in your house, you could be potentially mistreating angels or gods or demigods or whatever. So you would basically be killed by Zeus or whoever. Zeus and Hermes would just show up and to your house and they'd want food. And, yeah. Anyways, so this is kind of acknowledged much later on in different societies that you take care of your guests. It's a point of honor that you take care of your guests. You put out I was going to mention this in the sermon because I was going to talk about this for the Transfiguration. Is you put out the nice guest towels. You put out the you clean up the house a little bit before the kids before the guests come over, even if the kids make a mess. You do what you can, but kids are messy. Anyways. I just really wanted to beat that dead horse on verse 21 that talks about sojourners. There's a distinction between sojourner and somebody who's not supposed to be in a country according to the laws. Now, whether or not the laws are just is a different conversation, but we do have to follow even unjust laws as long as they don't command us to go against God's laws. And that's in Romans 13. So if the king says everybody must wear purple pants, we're going to follow the king. We have to, Yeah. All right, verse 25. This was the other one that's interesting that there's an ongoing kind of conversation about this right now. It says, if you lend money to any people, to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like the moneylender to him. You shall not exact interest in him. If you ever take your neighbor's clothes, so if you borrow stuff, give it back, that kind of stuff. But this idea here, there's a sin, and this was considered a pretty grave sin for a long time. It's called usury. And the idea is that you charge interest on loans. And we're so used to that. You have a credit card, you're paying interest. You know, a home loan, you pay interest. Car loan, you pay interest. How else are you supposed to make money off of letting people borrow your money? And the idea is that loans are supposed to be, the biblical idea, and this is expanded more in other verses as well. This talks about don't charge interest to the poor, but there's other verses that say don't charge interest to like your brother, to people around you. And the way people would get around this is they say, well, you can charge interest to people who aren't your family, who aren't your kin, who aren't your nationality or whatever. I'm like, we just had a verse about being being just to the sojourners. I don't think God's going to turn around and say, yeah, but you can tax them extra. You can make them pay extra on loans. And a lot of Christian philosophers and theologians over the years have basically talked about this and said, look, when you loan money to another Christian in particular, like it's especially worse if it's like a family member or another Christian. When you're loaning something to them, your goal is not to make money off of the other person. So if you need something, you need to borrow my coat, I'm not going to charge you for it. You can borrow my coat. You need to borrow my car, like that sort of thing. And the idea is that you are trusting that God will repay you for that. You don't have to charge interest on loans to other Christians because your goal is not to make money off of other Christians. Your goal is to help support your fellow Christians. But anyways, the conversation gets way more complicated from there. What about taking loans? We live in a society right now where everything has interest. Every financial institution, every financial transaction you make now has taxes and interest, and everything is connected to that. So we've gotten ourselves into quite a tangled mess. But specifically, at least on the interpersonal level, when we're interacting with other Christians, it's a good thing to keep the mindset of, look, my goal here is not to get something out of you. My goal here is to take care of you out of love. The goal should be love. And if you're worried about, well, what if they don't pay me back? What if I need that money? Then you're starting to doubt that God is going to continue to take care of you. Yes, sir.
Luther thought there was a connection between usury and inflation, but I couldn't fathom that.
I'm not sure specifically the details about the connection between usury and inflation, but I think some of it has to do with kind of like intentional inflation is devaluing a currency. So if I borrow something from you, then I give you back something that's not worth as much. I've made a profit. Even if on paper, look, I gave you back more money. Yeah, well, it's inflated currency. So it's a way of, it's tied very much to the seventh commandment, stealing, is being dishonest. There are dishonest ways to take people's money. You get something from somebody else, you hyperinflate the currency, you give them back, $1 million Zimbabwe dollars, which is worth like not even 1 penny. So, well, I gave you $1 million, I only borrowed $1 from you, so, you're winning in the end, right? The Bible talks a lot about money and how we use money. There's a lot of principles of money that we just kind of apply to every situation. Is that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. This is what the Bible says. It's very, very easy for us to come up with ways to sin regarding money, so we have to be very careful. So instead, when we are using money, we should be trusting God most of all. Don't be anxious about anything. We should be charitable and loving to one another. The goal of money should be a tool to use for good, not power to wield over somebody else unjustly, unfairly. Money itself is not bad, but it's one of the things that people have used for evil, so we have to be careful about it. It's like power. You've heard.
They always said follow the money.
Follow the money. Money talks. Yeah, well, infinite power corrupts infinitely. Well, unless it's God, because He's got infinite power and I think He's infinitely perfect. But the idea that some people like fame, for example, fame itself isn't bad. But how many times can you think of when somebody has gotten famous and that's led them into trouble or led them into sin?
How many times do you think that they haven't?
Right. It's interesting that it's usually, those famous actors and stuff who are in shows and movies and stuff. The ones that you don't hear about on the news are usually the ones who are behaving themselves. You only stay on the news if you're misbehaving. It's like, oh, whatever happened to Rick Moranis, the guy from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids? Well, his wife got cancer and he went and took care of his family for 30 years. You didn't hear about him in the news because he was taking care of his family. He wasn't doing anything bad. So you get famous by doing bad stuff and being in the news all the time. All right, that's a completely different topic. Let's get into Exodus 23. So this is so remember, you've got the 10 Commandments, and these are kind of detailed ways that a person can break these 10 Commandments. So stealing from taking advantage of a sojourner, for example, is a way of violating thou shalt not steal. So we'll keep going here. You shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with the wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not fall in with many to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit, siding with the many so as to pervert justice, nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. Some of this is counterintuitive. I mean, emotionally, a lot of people. So you've heard of mob mentality before, and when people get all riled up about a thing, you jump in. Now, it may not be true, but you get carried up in the hype of the movement. You shall not spread a false report. Well, I wasn't the one who lied. I'm just saying what I heard. Exactly. So this is now you may know that it's wrong. It's like, yeah, it's probably not true, but it's every news station, right? Yeah, it's every news station, every podcast. Not every, but yeah, this is how. I mean, with the news in particular, the first to report is an important thing. We're the first ones to talk about this issue. We're completely wrong. It doesn't matter. We're the first ones to talk about it. In addition to intentionally spreading a false report, this also means due diligence with the information. If you hear a rumor about somebody or something, maybe you want to confirm it before you start spreading it. You shall not join hands with the wicked man to be a malicious witness. So again, this is cooperating with somebody else who's lying. Well, I'm not the one who's lying. I'm just supporting the guy who's lying. No, don't do that. You shall not fall in with many to do evil. Again, mob mentality. You shall not bear witness in a lawsuit siding with the many so as to pervert justice. So again, this whole mob mentality, might makes right. I think when I'm thinking about stuff like this, I think about, if you guys read To Kill a Mockingbird, they made us all read it, and then later on I actually read it again as an adult. I'm like, okay, it's actually a good book, not just homework. In this, they're trying to put to death this guy called Boo Radley, and he is falsely accused of something, but everybody wants to convict. They want to convict him, even though they know that he's not actually guilty. And it's Atticus Finch who stands up as his lawyer. But mob mentality is really easy to get swept up in. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. This is an interesting one. Because there's a mentality that goes on today that the rich people are the bad, eat the rich, that kind of thing. Rich people are bad, poor people are noble. That there's an inherent, which is weird because it's like the inverse of what ancient societies would believe. What did this man do what did this man do or his parents do that he was born blind? They think that if you were sick or if you were poor, then this is because you did something bad and God or the gods were cursing you. The interesting thing that we have today is if somebody has a lot of money, that we generally assume as a society, this is a general thing, is that they got it dishonestly, or that the reason they have the money is because they took it from somebody else. So this automatic assumption of, let's say you've got two people in a court case and one of them has a ton of money and one of them doesn't have any money at all, that you automatically assume that one of them is innocent or guilty. Either one, whether you favor the rich man or you favor the poor man, just saying because they are rich, because they are poor, I'm going to favor them rather than justice. So this is God talking about that when you do justice, you have to do justice impartially. You can't say, I empathize with the guy who has less money, therefore I want to support him. You need to go in, the concept of, you've seen the statue where it's justice and she's got the sword and the scales and she's blind. That's the idea, is that you go in, if you're going to witness, if you're going to judge, that you don't do it based on, how much money does this poor person have? I'm going to be partial to the poor man in his lawsuit. You should just be focused on what is just and what is unjust. Don't be distracted with these other things. Now again, this is, and ever since, it's weird that this is the flip side of society's of ancient societies where if you had a lot of money, you know, the divine right of kings, if you were famous, if you had a lot of money, it's because God loved you, which is like prosperity gospel 101, you know. God gave me a jet because he favors me, and God gave me a diamond-studded Lamborghini because he favors me, therefore give me more money. If you are poor, that's because you're not praying hard enough, you don't have enough faith. You see how evil that sort of
I think
thinking is.
we don't even realize a lot of those people with a lot of money, they do
Yep.
a lot for the poor.
Well, this is also true. So yeah, and I'll say it like this. Not everyone who has a lot of money does a lot of charity.
Right.
But there are a lot of people who have much money and a lot of people who have very little money who do a lot for charity. You think of the widow's mite. So we've got the LWML thing coming up soon, and they've got the little boxes, the mite boxes, that she gave all she had. So charity is an issue of the heart, and there are a lot of people. This is one of my favorite examples because I just love this example. Do you know about St. Jude's Hospital? What does St. Jude's Hospital specialize in? Do you know? Children, and cancer and horrible diseases and stuff that children have to go to. How much money do you have to pay if you take a child to St. Jude's Hospital? Nothing. Well, and it's got nothing to do with your health care coverage either. It's because there are people who want to take care of the children so much that they donate millions and millions and probably billions of dollars for St. Jude's Hospital specifically to take care of children. You have these hospitals, dedicated places of learning like schools, dedicated orphanages. These were Christian institutions. This was an act of charity, an act of love, that we will pool together our funds as a community and have a community center where people can see a doctor together, where people can go and get educated together. The concept, this is why all of our ancient universities in the US and in England or overseas used to be, I'm not going to say now, I wouldn't say Oxford and Stanford and all, Princeton, they were like theological seminaries, many of them. Princeton was a theological seminary, right? Princeton Theological Seminary, they still might call it that. But it started out as Christian charity, to educate, to help, to heal, these sorts of things. So yeah, it isn't just having money makes you bad, but it's what do you do with what God has given you. If you have a widow's mite and you put that in the box, that's an act of love. If you have $1 billion and you use it for charity, then that's an act of love. Being rich or poor doesn't change that. Yes, sir.
Do you think the fact that God spoke these words to Moses at this time, that God realized that society back then had inherent injustices, just like today's?
I think so.
That's the motive.
Yes.
To try to correct some kind of endemic injustice in the system.
Right. So the people here, this isn't the first time. I mean, they would have already had these ideas of how to do right and wrong and how to do justice. And if Moses is specifically talking about don't make a false report, don't favor somebody, a poor man in a lawsuit, they could probably think of examples where that's happened. This is a problem that they have that needs to be dealt with. This is also something that we should learn from as well, obviously, because we still have a habit of being biased in court cases, and not just how good your lawyer is or what the truth is. All right, verse 4: if you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of the one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him. Interesting. You've heard the possibly parable, possible true Good Samaritan story. In the story, the Samaritans were the enemies of the Israelites, of the Jewish people. They were enemies. Samaritans and Jewish people were enemies. And Jesus kind of makes a big deal of the fact that the Samaritan helps out his enemy. This is this concept of love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you, that sort of thing. This is why, and you'll see this historically in some societies and historically absent in other societies, why in some societies, You have rules for, let's say, treating prisoners of war. You have rules for treating captured enemies. The Geneva Convention has a bunch of these things. This idea of you actually do show love to your enemy, even if he remains your enemy. Now, this isn't true in every culture. This isn't true in every religion. In Islam, for example, it is a sign of weakness to show mercy. Mercy, they call Allah merciful sometimes, but then other times not. But to show mercy on your enemy in some cultures and some religions is a sign of weakness. You take advantage where you see advantage. And the Christian idea is, look, even if somebody is your enemy, even if you don't like, it's not like you just don't get along with them, but it's so severe that they're an enemy. Even still, you don't have the option to be malicious to them. You do have to love your enemy as well. Not just the people you get along with. Everybody loves the people they get along with. Loving your enemy, now that's hard. That's what Jesus did. Verse 6, you shall not pervert the justice due to your poor in his lawsuit. So this is the inverse of don't show partiality to the poor. This is don't pervert the justice of the poor in his lawsuit. Keep far from a false charge. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked. And you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of those who are in the right. So again, this is valuing justice in any sort of court case rather than getting paid off. Yes, ma'am?
Back up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What did you mean when you said something's true, something not true? Good Samaritan story?
Sometimes possibly a parable, possibly not. When I said that, so I was basically saying that there's an ongoing theological conversation over whether or not the story of the Good Samaritan is a parable or something that actually literally happened.
Oh.
Which is a fascinating conversation because Jesus, a lot of times, he'll say, the kingdom of God is like ... and then he'll use a parable. And then Jesus told them a parable saying ... And that language isn't used in this case. He just says, there was a man who was going down to Jericho, or something like that. It doesn't really make a big difference theologically, but this is how theologians work, is they like to argue about stuff. It's realistic enough that it could have possibly happened. And Jesus could have been saying this is something that happened. It really doesn't make a difference in the interpretation of the story. It's just it's just one of these things where if you're talking about the parable of the Good Samaritan online, you'll have some theologian with a degree pop in and say, actually, maybe it wasn't a parable. Okay, fine. It doesn't change what it means. All right, yeah, so this is talking about being just, not being blinded by bribes. You shall not oppress a sojourner, so this is again, you know the heart of a sojourner, for you are sojourners in the land of Egypt. Now, I've said this before, that Hebrew is helical. It touches on the same points different times. It's not a perfect circle. It doesn't repeat itself perfectly, but it very similarly talks about the same sorts of ideas. So this is a repetition of taking care of the sojourners. All right, pages are sticking together. All right. All right, yes, so actually we're going to have to stop there because the next section gets into a completely different section about the Sabbaths. So let's stop there after verse 9. We covered again chapter 22, the end of that, and then the beginning of chapter 23, verses 1 through 9 today. But yeah, so then after that, yeah, things change up a little bit after that. So I don't want to start a section and then end mid-sentence. So let's close with the doxology.